new W12 Plus Accelerator. My name's Ellie Leaning, and I'm the project lead for the W12 Plus programs. W12 Plus is a movement that connects, catalyzes, and incubates urban water solutions. This movement is jointly run by the Institute for Ecological Civilization, a US NGO, and Save Our Schools, a South African nonprofit. The W12 Plus programs include a mix of research, facilitation, and convenings, all aimed at sharing solutions, empowering local leadership, and reducing knowledge gaps. This spring, we'll be releasing the W12 Plus Blueprint, a platform to share notable urban water solutions. And we're busy working on the W12 Plus Hub concept with an initial focus on equatorial Africa. We also just released our new website, which we encourage you to check out, and we'll include a link in the chat here. We're thrilled to welcome you to the first event of 2021, which also is the kickoff event of our new W12 Plus Accelerator series, Breaking the Cycle, COVID-19 and Water Insecurity. It is known that water insecurity accelerates the transmission of COVID-19, but what is less well known is the long-term impacts of decisions made during COVID-19 on long-term water security and climate resilience. This kickoff event features leaders in this space who will highlight the complexity of this issue and identify key areas to focus on for interventions, finance, policy, and attention. This accelerator also includes two more events to be held in March on the 18th and the 22nd. These two events will focus on action on the ground and then bridging that gap between action and theory and trends. On March 22nd, we'll then invite all of the panelists back on the stage for the next W12 Plus drive-in. I'm now pleased to introduce Philip Clayton, the president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization, who will be moderating this panel. Philip.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this W12 Plus exchange, leading the way for water security during COVID-19. I am pleased to be able to introduce 5 international specialists in water provisioning and study who are going to be addressing the key questions that are raised for water security in the time of the pandemic. Let me briefly introduce them and then invite them to give opening statements, and then we'll be engaged in an open dialogue after that, trying to bring out, both for interested persons and for experts on this broadcast, what are some of the key elements to keep in mind. First, I'm happy to introduce Fadi Georges Comer. He has been chairman of UNESCO's Intergovernmental Hydrological Program Council since November 2019. He's the president of Medurable Association, which organizes symposia annually on hydrodiplomacy in the French Senate. He's also the honorary president of MENBO and vice president of EMWIS. Mr. Comer initiated the concept of hydrodiplomacy with the aim of establishing water peace in transboundary basins and applying the water energy food nexus. Mr. Comer is a member of the Academy of Overseas Sciences, adjunct professor at the Cyprus Institute, university professor since 1993, and research fellow at New York University. He also founded and directed the Water Energy Environment Research Center at Notre Dame University in Lebanon.
Thank you.
Dr. Zafar Adil serves as the executive director of the Pacific Water Research Center and is professor of professional practice at the School of Sustainable Energy Engineering at Simon Fraser University. He has over 25 years of experience in a broad range of environmental science and policy issues, including 18 years working as a senior UN official with responsibilities in the field of international development and environmental policy. He has served as the director of the United Nations Institute for Water Environmental Health for 10 years and is chair of UN Water from 2010 to 2012. We also welcome HP Nanda, Global Vice President and General Manager at DuPont Water Solutions. He supervises, the Water Solutions Unit supervises 1,800 employees, 8 different manufacturing sites around the world, 9 technology centers, and has a commercial presence in most of the key countries around the world. DuPont Water Solutions is a global water technology leader with a portfolio of technologies including reverse osmosis, ion exchange resin, ultrafiltration, and other steps to solve water challenges for industrial, residential, and wastewater. HP has served the DuPont in India, holding different roles, and in Taiwan, and then China, India, and now as a senior leader in the United States. Next, I introduce Aklilu Frikwasilasi, who is a qualified urban and development planning, monitoring, and evaluation specialist, holding the MA degree in urban management and development. He specializes in urban and regional development strategies from Erasmus University in the Netherlands. His BA is in economics from Addis Ababa. He's currently a PhD candidate at University College Dublin. Currently, Aklilu is working as Director of Thriving and Resilient Cities at the Water Research Institute Africa, and he's a representative for WRI Africa office in Ethiopia. He has more than 17 years of professional experience in managing, planning, monitoring, and evaluating governmental and non-governmental programs. He's worked with UN Habitat as a program manager, with economic planning specialist as UNDP, South Sudan. He's been a bureau head for finance and economic development in the government in Ethiopia, a city manager, and a local NGO manager. In addition to all of this direct managerial and technical responsibility, Aklilu researches on urban-related issues, environment and common pool resources, and has contributed to studies of the UN Habitat, and actually you can find him in the Oxford Handbook on Industrial Hubs and Economic Development as well. And finally, Dr. Cecilia Totahada is a professor in practice at the School of Interdisciplinary Studies, University of Glasgow in the UK, and also a research fellow at the Institute of Water Policy at the National University in Singapore. She's working on impacts of global changes on water resources, environment, food, and societies. I can't list, there's a long list of major international institutions that she has advised for. The 7 different organizations in branching, her work has covered Africa, Asia, North and South America, and Europe, as she works on water and natural resources and environment-related policies. She's also a member of the OECD Initiative on Water Governance. Her other honors include past president of the International Water Resources Association, editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Water Resources Development, associate editor of Water International, and she's a member of editorial boards and editors of book series on water resources development at Oxford University Press, and on the water resources series at Springer. This gives you some sense of the level of people that it's our honor to be with today. And so in the same order, let me introduce them and ask them just to set the frame for the discussion that lies ahead of us. So what are we learning about the relations between global COVID-19 pandemic on the one hand, and then water security and access to water on the other? Why are some experts speaking of these relations as a vicious circle? What are we learning now about COVID-19 and waterborne transmission? And how are the pandemic and water security needs different in formal settlements and informal settlements, different types of human communities around the world? And may I turn then to Fadi to give us, just for a minute and a half or so, some sense of what is most important to hold in mind as we face this.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this high-level platform and to talk about a major component of the global changes that we are facing actually. In our IHP strategy for the next decade, the next decade is 2021 till 2029, we have considered COVID-19 as a global change component. And COVID-19, unfortunately, sounded as a wake-up call for all the water experts in the world. A wake-up call in order to make more effort, in order to ensure more access to safe drinking water to the population, safe sanitation and hygiene, being able to meet the objective number 6 of the ODD that we have in our hands, between our hands. As a simple gesture that the World Health Organization has promoted washing the hands, that leads to spend more and more water. And that leads for us that water is a major source of combating COVID-19. And this is why this could enhance complicated problem in the area where the regions are suffering of water stress, as in Africa, as in the MENA region also, because this water demand is actually being an excess from 5 till 15% that countries has to mobilize more and more in order to combat COVID. And this is linked directly to financial stakes also. If I take as an example the MENA region, it has happened that $150 million to $200 million has been spent each month in order to secure more water for the population and to secure more chemicals for disinfection. It means that COVID-19 has mobilized all the aspects of IWRM, Integrated Water Resource Management, and it needs also a special governance in order to secure the population. This is why I feel that we are facing really a big threat, and the governments has to mobilize all their goodwill in order to secure the population by combating COVID-19 through many programs to be implemented very soon.
Thank you, Fadi. Thank you for your opening statement. Dr. Adil, would you like to share an opening statement?
Yeah, thank you, Philip. And I'm really grateful to W12 for starting this conversation. Very interesting and important one. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge that I am located on the unceded and traditional territories of the indigenous peoples of Coast Salish languages, particularly the First Nations of Katsiye and Coquitlam. So I'm very grateful to be on these lands. So I would like to start with the question in terms of what is it that I've learned and how we can move forward. And I'll start with maybe a bit more provocative statement that we don't need to prepare for COVID-19 anymore, but we actually need to prepare for the next set of pandemics that we might face. And I say that for two reasons. One, that we already see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel with vaccination and with all kinds of public health practices. And secondly, we also know that the next set of pandemic might bring us some brand new challenges. And I think that's what we need to really prepare for, much more than addressing what is in some ways, most of it is behind us. And I think there's four specific areas where I think we need to strengthen our sort of response mechanisms, and each one of them relates to water security in different ways. And hopefully during the conversation today, there will be an opportunity to speak to each one of those. So the first one, and the obvious one, is to get secure access to safe water in all locations around the world. And this notion of water security has different elements, and as Fadi was mentioning, it relates to integrated water resources management. Secondly, we need to focus on a resilient economy that fits in with sustainable development concepts. It helps us achieve sustainable development goals. But that resilience has to withstand these shocks that come from a pandemic or another global event. Thirdly, we need a robust public health system which is able to not only respond to these kind of emergencies, but also scale up, and instead of targeted communities, operate essentially at national scale or even international scale. And we already know that lack of access to water, particularly in hospitals and clinics in many parts of the world, is a significant problem and challenge in addressing this pandemic. And I would argue that that would be a case for future pandemics as well. And the fourth area, and it's a little bit tangential, but I think quite closely related to water security, is food security. And this is something that we have observed, particularly in the indigenous communities here in Canada, that those communities had a very tenuous access to food supply, and they didn't have sustainable food resources of their own. So those four areas: secure access to safe water, resilient economy, robust public health system, which is scalable, and secure food supply, I think are those four areas where we really need to look. And as I said, each one of them requires having water security in the first place.
Thank you, Dr. Adil. Thank you. HP Nanda, how would you frame the discussion that lies ahead of us for our audience?
Thank you, Philip. I feel the pandemic sensitized all of us around the world. The increased need for sanitation and hygiene through frequent hand washing, which also drove the demand of water significantly up. And I think those billion people out of 7.8 billion people who don't have access to clean water every day were probably the most vulnerable part of our society. As the number of cases went up, just like my co-panelists just spoke, the demand of water in hospitals and homes went up, and we had less people in the water sites to manage because of the social distancing, the protocols for lockdowns. But we should also thank those hundreds of thousands of men and women of the water industry who worked tirelessly to keep the water flowing through the pipes and bring them home and bring them to hospitals. I am also thankful, if you think about the filtration technologies we have installed today in all the different sites around the world, different technologies, and they were effective for other pathogens. They were also effective for COVID-19 because we did not see the COVID virus in the water, which was really helpful, and we should be thankful for that. And I think I'm an eternal optimist, and I strongly believe the biggest silver lining that has come out of this crisis is the significant increase in awareness of sanitation and hygiene across all socio-economic groups in the society. And that is really going to be a very helpful thing for us to prepare ourselves for the future pandemic, if it happens and when it happens.
Thank you, HP. I now invite Aklilu Frikwit Salase to share his opening thoughts to frame our discussion.
Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to reflect and frame my discussion. I would like to see the perspective of water security from the angle of urban planning. As you can see, it's already well explained here. Urbanization is moving ahead, and if you consider African, I would like to share the view of African perspective. Most of the cities in Africa are really characterized by, like, they are unplanned, and most of 47% of the city dwellers are living in slum, where you have no access to water and sanitation and other basic services. Planning, and when it comes to water as well, water service or resilience is something beyond boundary. And during COVID, now having the sensitivity of planning now during COVID, providing water to those people around slum areas, in the areas that is not planned, have been a challenge. That is a wake-up call for those cities that have unplanned processes. And again, when it comes to the cities that are even planned, the way they are planned and the way they deliver urban basic services and water is really in silos. For example, those sectors that are attached, for example, water services, road, and those are really disconnected, and the sectors have been operating in silos. When it comes to the provision of, like, for example, water for hand washing and other services in the slum areas, there is no access. Even if there is a water, you cannot provide. There is no possibility. So it clearly shows us that there is a need for integrated plan to get the water right. And again, another issue is most of the plannings in the cities, basically in Africa, are really administrative and political. They follow administrative and political boundaries. But for water, it should not be that way. Everything has to go beyond, and it has to cover like environment, water, all those things have no boundaries. And the planning has to cover all the regions and sense what is happening. So this COVID, I should say, is an opportunity for the city leaders, for the planners to go beyond the silos and think of a long-term plan that could make the water secure and then available for the residents. So I'm saying that well-planned cities could offer this. Thank you.
Thank you, Akililu. And we come now to Dr. Cecilia Tortajada. Cecilia, could you share your opening thoughts with the audience?
Yes, thank you very much. Water is scarce all over the world, is polluted, is mismanaged. Governments have not managed to get it right. And we tend to focus more on concepts, on needs on the ground. And we still, in spite of all the technological achievement that there is in the world, still there is no provision of clean water for everybody. And this is billions of people. And this is very worrisome because it's a basic service. And COVID has put a strain on a system that was already stressed. Everybody was looking towards climate change, which was seen in the midterm, in the long term, but COVID was needed. And the world was unable to respond, not only in terms of health aspects, but in terms of supply of basic services such as water. So yes, this was a wake-up call, and this is a moment to replan, not because there can be another situation like this, but because it's time for people to receive a basic service such as clean water.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Let's turn briefly to our second question, and then I think I'll be driving the conversation more towards solutions because you've already conveyed so effectively the depth of the crisis and difficulty that has been exacerbated by COVID-19. But I think your analysis of exactly how the challenge has been raised by COVID-19 is an important way for a few minutes, maybe just two of you, to set the stage for our discussion of the kinds of interventions that each of you is prioritizing. So an open question to you: what are the key risk areas that COVID-19 has brought to the surface as we think about the international water situation out of your expertise? Let me just make it an open microphone and invite a few of you to jump in with your analysis of the key risk areas that have risen to the surface.
If I may make a comment.
I can start with.
Sorry, let's go ahead with Cecilia and then HP.
Go ahead. No, absolutely.
Thank you. If we're going to focus on solutions, let me skip the risk part, but focus on the solutions, as you mentioned before. After working on Singapore for over a decade, I have learned the benefit of planning in the long term. So Singapore has been planning in the long term, as a result of which COVID put a strain, but there was no impact. People continue receiving clean water. What is the difference with another developed cities? Many, because there was more stress in the system and much more in the case of developing. So I still think that if we talk about future and solutions, we have to go back to planning in the long term, in the longer term, much more, because normally water is planned within a very short-term framework.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Celia. HP, you wanted to make a comment.
Thank you. So I felt the whole crisis. So there are two major changes that happened during the pandemic. They will happen in any pandemic. The ecosystem underwent a change and the vulnerability to the infrastructure that we have. And if you look at the ecosystem, it had a lot of changes. From a use standpoint, the residential demand went through the roof, the industrial demand came down, the peak demand in a particular timing of the day underwent a change. Chlorine getting added, disinfection byproducts getting added, that changed the way generally we operate. Wastewater, more pharmaceutical products, new pharmaceutical products, maybe non-flushable materials getting into the wastewater. And even the governments around the countries, they were panicking how to handle the COVID. So the focus on regulation, the water security, that also underwent change. So I'm sure it is going to be natural. The ecosystem will always undergo change during any crisis, and how do we really take care of that? The second, which is a topic we all have been talking, the water infrastructure in many countries around the world is aged and very old, but we wanted this whole same infrastructure to operate reliably and with a lot more stress for higher demand during a crisis like this, with much less people available to operate and maintain, because people cannot go even to the sites because of social distancing and the protocols. And I think those are the two issues we need to find out solutions, how to make the ecosystem more adaptive, more flexible, so that we can be better prepared for the future.
Let's follow the lead here of Aklilu, and let me ask Fadi, Adil, and Aklilu, what are we learning about the water situation from this year of COVID? What are things that are clearer to us now in light of the global pandemic? I'm really interested. Fadi, can you speak to that?
Very interesting question. I feel that what we have learned is how to maintain good standard in the operation of the water in the countries. And this is what we are targeting actually in our next strategy for UNESCO. In order to maintain a good standard for drinking water, we need to apply good practices also, and we need to encourage the government to apply good practices and to share these practices between every government, every nation in the region. That means that we need to provoke scientific platform for exchanging the practices between the countries, and also to support investment, because supporting investment for the needed areas, as in Africa, as in the MENA, could help also maintaining the good standards. In order to support the investment, we won't be able to let the government rely on their proper budget. We need to also engage the private sector to help also in maintaining the good standards of water and sanitation, and also without forgetting the nexus and the implication of the COVID-19 on the nexus of water, of energy, and of food. These are the three ODD that we need to apply and to meet in an emergency plan. We need to fight in order to put emergency plan so that we won't have, as Professor Zafar said, a new problem of contamination, and to put early warning system between us so that we can face any other pandemic that will affect the humanity.
Yes, thank you, Fadi. Aklilu and Adil, briefly, what are the key things that you think, one or two key things you think we have learned from a year of global pandemic about water?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Is it me,
Yes.
Aklilu? Yes. So thank you very much. COVID, tells that it's a very good indication for us. It's a wake-up call on how we plan the cities, how we lead urbanization. Because in a slum area, now COVID, it came, and even if water is available somewhere, you cannot fly on a plane and then drop water. It's impossible. There must be some plans. So planned city, it informed the world. COVID is an addition to the existing risks, the existing horrible situations that world encountered. So it tells us the world on how to plan the city. So planned city model is also key. And again, integrated processes. For example, the national plans and down on the local plans has to come together. That is also a key. Another issue, the data, the existing data and the analysis capacity of the local people is very weak. Even in slum areas, for example, when they estimate water supply in the city, they don't consider the number of people who are living in the slum area. Imagine how that number will be like huge when it comes to Africa. 47% of the population living in slum. If you fail to acknowledge that number, and if you think about secured water system, that will be horrible. So building the capacity at local leaders don't have that capacity to have a data. And I have to say that if the city is right, well planned, integrated to the local its hinterland, that could offer really a very good solution for not only water but also other related services.
Thank you, Aklilu. Dr. Deal, any words about what we've learned specifically from this global pandemic?
Yeah. So I actually fully agree with what Aklilu was just saying about better planned cities. But I would actually like to go off at a bit of a tangent from that. I think in terms of the highest level of vulnerability to water insecurity and as well pandemic impacts are actually remote and rural areas. And we still have, slightly less than half the world's population living in these areas. But we know that they are politically marginalized. They have insecure access to not just water, energy, and food, but even to public health services. And the economic resilience oftentimes, and particularly in areas which are water scarce and drier to begin with, that level of vulnerability is quite high. So I think if we are looking at the whole situation from a water security lens, then I would argue that we must also have a very strong focus on remote and rural areas. And there's two particular strands of action that we can think about. One is engaging communities in being at a higher level of preparedness. And to get that, of course, we need help from government, but I think the crucial role there to be played is by civil society organizations, which are typically operating at the grassroots level in these remote and rural areas. Secondly, we need to think of integrated solutions, and I fully agree with Fadi, who said that you need to address water, energy, and food security at the same time. That means that when you're discussing challenges in these remote communities, you have to think about addressing all three of those problems at the same time. So you don't do piecemeal water solutions and go back 5 years later and say, here's an energy solution. So it has to be integrated. And I think the issue is that these remote and rural areas are at a disadvantage, not just in developing countries, but also in developed countries. And again, I can cite an example of here in Canada that those remote communities indeed are facing way more significant challenges, and the health impacts of the pandemic are significantly stronger. So all the power to well-designed cities, but I think as a strategic priority, we must also think of remote and rural communities.
Okay, I think that's an excellent focus. We move now to the solutions part of our broadcast, lessons that we can learn for the future. And I want to stretch this discussion out because you represent the expertise in the roles of the state, the private sector, and civil society. So as we think about building back better, where do you think the focus needs to go? Let me start with Cecilia, if I could, to hear your opening comments, and then maybe turn to HP on investment priorities. Cecilia, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I think what the question you have asked is very pertinent. Where do we start? We have to start by better planning. We have to start by seeing what were our failures. As Adil says, rural communities have been forgotten for a long time. Poor people are forgotten. We have been focusing for too long on the cities, the places for innovation, except the cities also fail. There are so many people in the countries that everybody, not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas, population requires the services. So I think in order for the world to go ahead, to have learned, we have to do an analysis. What went wrong? And many pieces will be recovered. It will be planning, it will be institutional aspects, it will be better policies, certainly better investments. And very much, and it has been mentioned several times, a part of the integration. We have to learn how to work together. There is these movements in which it's considered that what the government does is wrong, what private sector does is wrong, what NGOs do is right. And there is not, it shouldn't be that division. We have to work together because on the one hand, the private sector is essential and policies come under implementation, come only from the government. Small group of people cannot make a change, but this gives an opportunity, a huge opportunity, but we have to start by revising all that has gone wrong. And it will be the way we will find the specific, we will define specifically how to improve, and this will depend on the location and on the situations.
Cecilia, that's an excellent overview of the multi-sectoral approach that is crucial. It also is a great way to invite HP to speak about his sense of investment priorities in light of this pandemic and its effect on water security.
Thank you. Thanks, Philip. I cannot agree more with all my co-panelists. This societal challenge requires holistic problem solving because we have a multi-sectoral issues, we have energy water nexus, we have issues about cities and rural, integrated urban planning, everything. So probably two thoughts I wanted to share. One, so I think if you look at the cities and we look at from the investment standpoint to improve water security and make us better prepared for the next pandemic, how do we make the technologies, the systems, and the infrastructure more durable and more flexible? I think that has to be focused. So how to ensure the systems, they really can last much longer, they can reliably produce the consistency of performance we need with the less manual intervention, less downtime, so that we can really improve water security. We have to also make the whole infrastructure flexible because using all the new tools and technologies that we are hearing, digital, IoT, smart systems, so that remote monitoring, remote operation, remote leak detection, so that we can make the whole system more effective and efficient and better prepared for the future. I think that is where you have to focus on from the city standpoint, from the centralized system standpoint. I agree with Professor Jaffer, what he spoke about. Still 50% of the world is in rural areas. And we need to focus on how to solve that part. And I think this is where decentralized systems will play a critical role, because decentralized systems will also require less investment. The time to market will be much quicker. And you look at it during a pandemic, the most vulnerable part of the society can be better served by decentralized systems, because we can give them safe access to clean water quickly by having decentralized systems. And when we do that, we can prevent waterborne diseases and having frequent visit of those people to hospitals, because the hospitals are already stressed out during a pandemic. And we are having more people going to hospitals with the waterborne diseases is going to just further aggravate the problem. So I think the focus on right technology, right decentralized solutions for the rural areas, while we focus on centralized systems for more durability and more flexibility, will be a way to go.
HP, that's very helpful. Clearly, you have worked in governments and studied government's roles. And I'm really interested in what is your vision for building more resilient systems that can ensure public health and water security over the long term. As you've said, COVID-19 has shown us the vulnerability of current systems and the suffering of many people who don't seem to be counted in the process. It's on the government question. What do you advocate?
Thank you very much. Actually, on the government side, before going there, I would like to indicate that when I say cities, urban or cities, like rural is a continuum of urban area. It's like they are connected. There is no demarcation as such. Actually, we used to say that urban, rural, but there is no as such clear demarcation. And when I say planning, it has to go beyond the boundaries and it has to be integrated. It has to be, I can tell you the living example of Addis Ababa. When they build a road, they have to cut off the all invested pipelines. That is huge cost because of lack of integration. So I would like to emphasize on integrated plan. So when it comes to the government at local level or the national level, there is no as such capacity of analyzing the situation, the existing situation, and predicting the risk. It's not, it won't stop in COVID. I mean, other risks can come. So there is no as such capacity at local level to assess and analyze and suggest solutions. So to get cities right as well, and with very good stand to provide water, there has to be a proper capacity at local level that is with a knowledge to plan, better plan cities, urbanization, all those capacity has to be there. Another issue is an inclusive system has to be there and integrated. Inclusive when I say the slum people, the people living there. And when I say inclusive, the people beyond the city's boundary, for example, rural areas, has to be part of this planning process. So the local governments have no as such capacity to build that. So the capacity of local government and national government has to be strengthened. Another issue just to build on is that when I'm not against decentralization, but when it comes to local level, if, like, for example, if you give a small locality to do their own best, if there is no capacity to understand what's going on from the national policy, I can tell you the industrialization process in Ethiopia, for example, there is a huge industrialization going on in the city, but the local government don't have a capacity. For example, in Hawassa, called a city, 60,000 people will join the city with that industrialization process. Imagine how the demand of water there. So decentralization has to be linked with some sense of national policies and actions. So that's that I would like to add. And then well-planned, I should say it again, well-planned cities, when I say integrated and inclusive planning can help local and national level authorities to get better water right. Thank you.
Thank you, Aklilu. A number of questions are being added to the list from around the world. I want to give a chance to focus on these experts and who are raising questions for you. But I do want to pause and ask if Fadi or Adil wanted to make a brief comment on this solutions portion of our broadcast before we move on.
I can jump in with maybe some thoughts about government investments and government priorities.
Okay, but just really briefly, about 1 minute, okay, Adil?
Yes. So I think generally speaking, the prioritization of how government forms its enabling policies has to be driven by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so that framing is already there. But I think how the investments have taken place in different sectors, and of course, I'm quite keenly interested in what goes into water-related sectors. I think there's been a disproportionate lack of investment, and that's why we see that the progress towards achievement of Sustainable Development Goals has been, well, for the lack of a better word, quite dismal still in the last 5 years. For example, I would love to see maybe something like 5% of defense expenditures be rerouted and be focused on achieving water security, because we've known in this pandemic that having the strongest military is going to be useless if your large fraction of your population is going to be impacted by a pandemic. So I think this reshifting and refocusing of investments by national governments, I think, is critical. And again, the SDGs provide a wonderful framing for doing that.
Thanks. Fadi, could you close off this section on solutions in our broadcast?
Thank you. What I will propose in order to close the section is that, of course, as Akilu said, we need integrated planning among all our urban water planning. But until now, there is a big gap that we don't have guidelines until now. We don't have so far tools in order to combat COVID-19 within the water community. So humanity is facing actually a big challenge. What we need to do as water experts, we need to gather all our effort between decision makers and between scientists and water operator in order to put on the table guidelines for the nations, so that these nations who does not implement IWRM process could deal with the pandemic as a whole component from IWRM to prevent the sanitary problem of their population. We need, because we don't have guidelines, all MDs and researchers are working for vaccines now, promoting vaccines. But as a water community, up till now, we don't have any guidelines to promote a solution against pandemic, which could affect water. And water is essential, as I have said in my introductory statement, in order to combat COVID-19. So we need to gather all our effort and to create a platform. Why don't we create it through UNESCO? Why don't we create it through the UN University with Dr. Zafar and all our colleagues who are in this platform, to promote those guidelines, to tell the nations, especially the nations who are working under real water stress, as in Africa and the Middle East. Take, for example, Gaza, take Palestine. They don't have any guidelines to follow for sanitation. Pandemic COVID-19 will worsen the situation. So we ask you urgently to create this platform so that we can put all our goodwill to help humanity, which is facing this extraordinary challenge.
Fadi, thank you for that call to action, which is completely appropriate to your position in UNESCO, but also to the nature of these W12 conferences, which seek that kind of collaboration that we can only do together. Academics, private sector, intergovernmental organizations, and governments. I think I want to underscore the importance of the call that you just made. We have a variety of fascinating questions from around the world. We'll only be able to get to a few of them. I'll try, if you're relatively brief, we'll try to get the first questions out. The first one concerns bidirectionality, that the movement, and some say a vicious circle between water insecurity and now the effects of COVID. Professor Totayada, I had read an article of yours, so let me start with you as the first one to respond to this question, because I know that you've published on it already. The question says, you haven't focused yet on how the COVID crisis has exacerbated water insecurity. And the questioner asked about lack of municipal funds, lack of conservation, as people and municipalities and businesses consume more and more water. This bidirectional dynamic, they would like you to speak to it. Let me again begin with Cecilia and then see if others want to speak to it.
Yes, of course. COVID has put a stress on a system that was already stressed. So when we talk about lack of funding, lack of planning, lack of policies, infrastructure which is not in good shape, we have managed, the cities, the developed cities, because they have mostly all infrastructure, the developing cities, because there is not enough infrastructure, have been trying to cope with this. And then it comes one element that is COVID. And the impact on water is that more water is needed, water that we don't have. And then we find out that clean water is needed, except there are so many places where we don't have clean water. So that is what happened. It just exposed what we already knew that existed. It exposed the enormous problem we have all over the world, as Adil has said, not only in developing cities, but in the rural or poor areas in developed countries, in developed cities. So this is a moment to act. And so in this case, when you talk about, or the person who has the questions is about bidirectionality, is because it exposed the problems that already existed and because it put a stress on a situation that it was already very, very stretched. You are muted, I'm sorry.
Would anyone else want to comment on this, this bidirectional dynamic?
If I can jump in.
Adil, please, Adil.
Yeah, I think a significant sort of unintended side effect of the pandemic has been that the investments that were going into water security have dried up, and that has happened both at national level and the international community and the development partners. Their attention has been diverted, I should say, maybe rightly so, because there's a question of life and death. But we've seen this particularly in 2020, that the international investments into water development and water security projects has taken a nosedive. So I think this is something that needs to be addressed. So this is kind of the other end of the flow, that COVID-19 has actually adversely impacted how we are addressing water security at a global scale.
Mm-hmm. Good. We have a question from Jonas Villadsen from Grundfos in Denmark. And Jonas asks, policy is mentioned as a very important enabler for the solutions. Can the panel create a top 3 of policy or regulation initiatives that you believe would be the key enablers for the technological solutions? So again, a question from private industry from Grundfos, and Jonas asked, what would be your top 3? Let's, to make it dialogical, ask each of you to share one, just one briefly, and let's see what we get out of this 5 of you together. Anyone?
I would say that there is a top 1, not top 3. Top 1 is planning in the long term.
Excellent. Let's just keep the dialogue going. I won't say anything, and let's throw out the ideas that come to you.
Well, I would repeat decentralization, what ASP was already talking about. I think as a policy framing, I think we really need to look at sort of solutions that can work independently of each other and still maintain this larger scale planning framework. So it has to be done at a national scale and in a national planning framework, but the solutions have to be really localized.
Just to, I would like to just add on Cecilia's agenda of just the word integrated plan, because water provision is not just a standalone. It is related with all the infrastructure. So I would say integrated and inclusive plan is needed, and a shift from proactive measure, because now the world is like taking a proactive measure. So it's really the world is acting. So we need the proactive measures in the future. So I would say integrated and inclusive plan that could cover all the sectors together.
Thank you. Others?
Maybe
I would say,
to addition to everybody said, there is a study by WRI. If we had 1% of the GDP invested between 2015 and 2030 sustainably across the world, by 2030, we will have access of clean water to the entire humanity. So I think the consistency of the committed investment year after year, in addition to everything the co-panelists spoke about.
Mm-hmm. And Fadi?
I would say securing access to water for the vulnerable communities, because in the urban planning, we are applying IWRM, and Akilu has talked about planning, integrated planning. In all the big cities, we are applying IWRM, but securing the access to water, clean water to the vulnerable community, I think this is the first target we need to implement in order to secure water for the rural areas.
Thank you. I wish we had another hour to continue. We are limited now. We only have 6 minutes left. So your last answer will have to be about 1 minute, because we do have some closing comments. It's a question that's come in from the international water specialist, Larry Swadek, a Canadian expert with several decades of experience in Africa. And Professor Swadek asks, given the breadth and depth of the water security challenges, what one step would each of you take? Given the breadth and depth of the water security challenges, what one step would each of you take? Let me begin with Cecilia, and I'll call on you one by one.
I don't think one can take one step. Water security is a combination of poor management, insufficient financing, not proper operation, not proper capacity building. Water security is a term that involves many other concepts. So that cannot be solved with one solution, right? Or one more concept. We have to take them into parts, and we have to solve one by one.
Thank you very much. Adil.
Thanks, Larry, for asking this loaded question. I would say community preparedness, I think, is one thing that I would really want to achieve. I mean, if I had a magic wand to enable communities to have resilience to their water security issues and their health well-being issues, to have secure access to food, I think that's where I would focus. And I think there is a very significant role for the for the civil society organizations and NGOs to play in achieving that resilience.
Fantastic. HP Nanda, what would you list as your?
Yeah, maybe work with the public sector, the private sector, other co-partners, the funding agencies and the NGOs to truly push the envelope of new business model, new partnership model, and a new ways of problem solving, so that we will be able to figure out what we can do at different countries in different society, different parts of the world, locally, to make a meaningful difference.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Aklidu, what would be your number one?
I know my number one is about like putting a very good system in place, and also advocating for the role of getting clean water right, because getting water right is connected with health and everything, even productivity and all those stuff. So I think it's really good to redirect the investment toward the clean water, both from the government and the community and all non-governmental organizations. And at the end, get the cities well planned. Thank you.
Fantastic. And the brevity of all of you is a virtue. It shows that you're professionals. This allows us to close with Fadi Kumer. Your thought, if you had just one step to focus on.
Thank you so much. I think that changing our behavior and the water spending, which is increasing in so many countries, should be directly implementing through awareness and through policy response based on the application of SDG 6, which is influenced directly by the global changes and which is influenced by the water culture. We need to enhance a water culture program for all the communities. With the help of NGO, we can succeed, and we can gain the war against pandemic COVID, especially in water.
Thank you, Fadi. I invite the audience from around the world to join me in thanking these 5 experts who devote their life, their professional lives, to addressing water challenges. And please join me in applauding. You can hear the resounding applause from around the world for the panelists. It is surprisingly rare that we have experts in these 5 different sectors joining together to look for the kinds of policies that we can develop across sectors to address the most fundamental issues that underlie water insecurity. And I want to compliment you both for the realism and expertise of your comments, but also for the vision that each of you brings toward actual achieving of solutions. I have found this hour to be an hour that brings hope, that lets me know that there are solutions out there that can be implemented, that we don't need to ignore the suffering of those who live in constant water insecurity, but that there are steps that we as the global community can take, private sector, public sector, government, nonprofit, intergovernmental organizations, to actually make a difference. And I think I want to, on behalf of the entire audience, express my thanks to you for a vision that brings hope. Ellie, leaning back to you to close.
Thank you, Philip. And thank you, everyone. This was a fantastic panel. And I think everybody learned a lot and had a really great space to reflect on what decisions made today can really mean over the long term as we strive to meet SDG 6 and all of the other SDGs as well. So I wanted to just take a minute to thank you all for being here and ask you to please like our channel, subscribe, and follow us on social media and via our newsletter sign up on our website. Please also mark your calendars for the upcoming W12 Plus events to be held on March 18th and March 22nd. We look forward to seeing you there. And as always, be in touch if you want to know anything more about W12 Plus or want to be involved in any way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.